Every morning, before the sun had the chance to stretch across the old asphalt, the metal shutter of the garage would screech open. A low clank, then silence. The kind of silence that lingered in small towns where people rose early but spoke little. Inside the dim shop, a man in his late 50s flicked on a single overhead bulb. Its light buzzed for a second before settling into a tired glow. He wasn't much to look at. Broad-shouldered but a bit hunched now, hair faded into gray patches, oil stains permanently etched into the cuffs of his sleeves. His name was Walter, though few called him that. Most just referred to the place as the old guy's garage. It sat on the edge of a 2-lane highway, tucked between a closed-down diner and a field of dry weeds that never seemed to die. Walter lived alone in the small apartment above the garage. He cooked simple meals, toast and black coffee in the morning, soup from a can at night. His radio only picked up 2 stations, and he liked it that way. Routine was his comfort. Each day blurred into the next, but he didn't mind. He kept the tools aligned on the wall with chalk outlines. He wiped his hands clean before touching any customer's steering wheel. Didn't matter if the car was worth $500 or $50,000. Some people noticed. Most didn't. Locals said he was clumsy, rough around the edges, but really, he just wasn't one for talking. He listened more than he spoke and fixed more than he explained. That day, the sky had been gray since morning. Around noon, the rain started, slow at first, then heavier, tapping the tin roof like impatient fingers. Walter was underneath an old Ford when he heard the soft sputter of another engine rolling in. Not the confident hum of someone passing through. This one coughed, then gave out. He pushed himself up from the creeper, wiped his hands on a rag, and stepped out just as the driver's door opened. A woman, maybe mid-40s, scrambled out. Her coat clung to her shoulders, hair plastered against her face. She was clearly not from around here. The kind of person who apologized too quickly, whose eyes flickered between worry and politeness. She popped the trunk and stared at it like it held the answers she didn't know how to ask. Walter didn't say much, just nodded once and pointed to the key she held. She hesitated, then handed it over like it weighed something more than metal. He worked quietly, changed the alternator, tightened a few belts, replaced a hose that was about to give out. Rain dripped from the roof, pooling by his feet. An hour passed. Maybe 2. She sat on a bench under the awning, holding her purse in both hands, watching every move he made. When it was done, he handed back the key. She looked startled, then fumbled to unzip her wallet. Her hands were still shaking. I don't think I have enough, she said, voice small. Walter shrugged. The car's running. Be careful on the slippery road. She stared at him. Eyes wide, lips parted like she wanted to say more, but instead she just said, "Thank you," again and again. Each time quieter. He didn't answer, just wiped his hands, turned, and disappeared back into the shop. She left not long after. The wipers struggled against the rain, then the car faded into the mist. She never said her name, he never asked, and no one thought they'd ever meet again. Walter didn't think about her again, not because he didn't care, but because that's how he was. He fixed things, not memories. The rain had stopped the next morning, but the air still smelled of rust and wet pavement. Walter slid open the garage door like he did every day. No hesitation, no excitement, just motion. Predictable, familiar, but the street outside was starting to shift. A few shops down, something new had appeared. A sleek glass storefront glowing with a fresh coat of paint and a neon sign that buzzed even in daylight. Modern Auto Center, free diagnostics, digital warranty included. Walter glanced at it once, then didn't look again. He hung his apron, clicked on the same overhead bulb, and wiped his hands on the same old rag. By 9 a.m., no one had come. At first, he didn't think much of it. Slow mornings happened. But then Tuesday passed without a single oil change. Wednesday, the Bellamy brothers, who used to bring their pickup in like clockwork every 2 weeks, drove straight past, didn't even wave. Thursday morning, old Mrs. Crandall, who once insisted only Walter touched her car, pulled into the new garage across the street. Walter watched from behind the dusty glass window. Her son stepped out and shook hands with the man in the sharp uniform. The hood of her Toyota popped up. Walter turned away. By the end of the week, only 2 people had come by, and one of them just wanted to use the bathroom. Friday, a teenager with slick hair and an expensive watch walked in, twirling a BMW key between his fingers. Walter looked up from his workbench. The kid glanced around the shop with a face pinched, like he smelled something bad. "This where you fix cars?" the boy asked, tone lazy, condescending. Walter nodded once. "If they're broken." The kid chuckled. "I wouldn't let a place like this touch my rims." He walked deeper into the shop, then accidentally bumped into the tool rack. Wrenches and screwdrivers clattered to the floor. A dirty rag slid across the concrete. The boy smiled. "No offense, old man," he added, "but this place looks like it belongs in a museum." Then he turned and walked out, whistling. Walter didn't say a word. He crouched down, slowly gathering each tool, one by one. He wiped the oil-stained rag across the floor, even though it made little difference. The smell of fresh polish and synthetic lemon cleaner from across the street drifted in. The next day, someone had spray-painted Dino Garage in sloppy red letters on the side of his shop. He didn't scrub it off. He just repainted the whole side a dull gray, same as the rest. On Sunday afternoon, Walter stood behind the counter, going over some receipts. They were thin. He traced the numbers with a pen, but didn't press hard. The sound of footsteps outside made him look up. The landlord. He was a wide man in a suede jacket, chewing something that clicked against his molars. He didn't take off his sunglasses. "Walter," he said, not unkindly, but not gently either. "Been meaning to stop by." Walter waited. "You know that new place across the road? They're interested in expanding." He gestured vaguely behind him. "Bigger budget, flashier setup, same square footage." Walter kept his eyes on the receipts. "I told him I'd give you through next month. If rent's not in on time, I'll hand it over. No hard feelings." Walter just nodded. Not slow, not fast. Just enough to say, heard and understood. The landlord left without shaking hands. That night, Walter didn't cook. He sat in his chair by the window, bowl of crackers untouched on the armrest. The TV was on, but the volume was low, more habit than attention. He watched the garage across the street. The lights were still on, even though it was nearly 10 p.m. Bright white LEDs that made the new garage look like a spaceship landed beside his old shop. From the second-floor window, he could see shadows moving inside. People cleaning tools that hadn't even gotten dirty yet. Uniforms with logos. A barista-style coffee machine in the corner. Walter reached for his glass of water and stopped halfway. His hand was still dark with grease. He stared at it for a second. Then he stood, walked back down to the shop, and turned off the light. The next morning, he came in like always, pushed the door open, flipped the switch. The bulb flickered a little longer this time before lighting up. There were no customers, just silence. The silence of machines not humming, of phones not ringing. He sat by the workbench, sorted through spark plugs, and wrote down the inventory with a pencil so short it was nearly just lead. Time passed slowly. The only sound was the old table fan by the door, rattling on its rusty base. Late afternoon, the clouds came back. He looked up from his work as thunder rolled in the distance. Rain threatened again. Walter walked to the front of the shop. On the other side of the road, the new garage buzzed with motion. A white SUV pulled in and was immediately swarmed by 2 attendants. They smiled as they opened the hood. Customers walked in and came out with glossy pamphlets in hand. Walter looked at his hands again, creases in his knuckles filled with black oil. He rubbed them together, but the stain wouldn't come off. He went back inside and sat in his usual chair. The fan kept rattling. He didn't reach to fix it. Outside, the garage across the street flickered like a promise he was never invited to. The afternoon heat settled low over the street, making the air thick and quiet. Walter hadn't spoken to a single customer in 2 days, but he still opened the door like someone might walk in. It was the kind of silence that made sounds seem louder than they were. The tick of cooling engines, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of dry leaves skipping down the sidewalk. Walter was behind the shop, reorganizing a drawer that didn't need reorganizing, when he heard the soft creak of wheels. Not tires on pavement, but something dragging. He stepped to the edge of the garage, squinting through the light. A boy, maybe 10, was walking a bent bicycle. The front tire flopped with every step. His shirt was 2 sizes too big, his jeans cuffed with string. His cheeks were smudged with dirt. He didn't cry. He didn't even frown. Just walked, like this kind of thing happened a lot. Walter didn't call out. Just walked to the gate, pushed it open with one hand, and pointed inside. "Bring it here." The boy paused, startled. He looked back the way he came. No one, then looked at Walter, unsure. Walter had already turned, walking back inside. He didn't wait to see if the boy followed. A few minutes later, the boy wheeled the bike through the doorway, awkwardly avoiding the oil puddles. Walter had already set out a low stool and was digging through a drawer of patches. He didn't ask the boy's name. Didn't ask what happened. Just knelt down, pinched the tire, found the hole by feel. His fingers moved with the rhythm of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, not because it was his job, but because it was needed. The boy stood nearby, silent, hands tucked into his sleeves. He watched every motion, eyes wide but tired. Walter finished patching the tube, inflated it with the old foot pump, then spun the wheel once to check the wobble. It still leaned slightly, but it would hold. Then he reached into the mini-fridge near the desk, pulled out a candy bar he kept in a drawer, leftover from last Halloween probably, and placed it in the boy's hand. "Go slowly," he said, not unkind, just firm, like saying it mattered. The boy didn't smile. He just nodded, then climbed on the bike and pedaled off, one pant leg catching in the breeze. No one saw. No one clapped. No phone recorded it. The only sound left behind was the soft honk of the bike horn, twice, like a thank you with no words, and then nothing. Walter stood in the doorway for a second longer, then walked back inside. He washed his hands slowly, even though they weren't that dirty, dried them on the same old rag. Then, without a word, he refolded the stool and returned it to its place beneath the shelf. And before he sat down again, he opened the drawer where the candy had been and quietly placed a new bar inside. The late sun cast a long shadow through the garage doorway. Walter had restocked the shelf, just like he did most days, even if no one noticed what was missing. Walter was crouched near the workbench, replacing the worn wiring on a busted taillight, when he noticed a figure standing outside. A young man, neatly dressed, hands in his coat pockets, just standing there, not moving, just looking. Walter kept working. He'd learned not to assume someone staring meant anything. Some looked out of pity. Others looked like they were taking inventory of what was still standing, but this one didn't look either curious or dismissive, just still. After what felt like a minute, maybe more, the man stepped forward and pushed open the door. The bell above the frame hadn't worked in years, but it made a soft knock against the metal anyway. Walter looked up. The man's shoes were polished. Not the kind that belonged in a garage. His collar was sharp, not from ironing, but from habit, like he didn't own clothes that wrinkled. His eyes scanned the room briefly, taking in the tools, the old radio, the fan still rattling softly in the corner. Then, calmly, he asked, "Do you remember fixing an old Chevrolet for a woman on a rainy day?" Walter stood still. He blinked once. His hands were still holding the pliers. "Many cars are similar," he said simply. The young man nodded, as if he expected that. "Then I guess I remember for you," he said. He stepped closer to the counter and reached into his coat pocket. From it he pulled out a small business card and laid it gently on the scarred wooden surface. He didn't push it forward, just placed it there like something that didn't need convincing. Walter didn't look down at it right away. The young man didn't seem to expect him to. He glanced around the shop again, his gaze lingering on the cracked cement floor, the faded clock on the back wall, the faded cash-only sign taped to the register. "It's smaller than I imagined," he said. Walter didn't respond. He wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult. Maybe neither. The man offered a faint smile. Not smug, not forced, just knowing. "I just stopped by," he said, already turning toward the door, "to see this place, see that the lights are still on." He paused at the threshold, one hand on the doorframe. "Funny," he added, "some things don't change." And then he left. The door creaked closed behind him. Walter stayed where he was for a while, staring at the spot where the man had stood. Eventually, he reached down and picked up the card. The logo was clean, modern, a logistics company, big from the looks of it, a name he'd seen on trucks passing through town but never given a thought to. The title under the man's name was something long and formal, Director of Strategic Distribution, not the kind of thing he ever imagined knowing personally. He turned the card over, nothing on the back, no note, no message. He set it down and walked back to the bench. His tools were still there. The broken light was still broken. The radio played the same song it always did on Fridays, but he kept glancing back at the card. Later that evening, when he closed the shop, he didn't toss the card out with the receipts like he usually did when someone left a flyer or a service ad. He slipped it into the top drawer beside the spare keys. That night, he didn't eat dinner. He sat by the window, the card still in his hand. The garage across the street had shut its lights early, for once. The whole street felt stiller than usual. He turned the card over again, as if this time it might say something different, as if maybe it had been waiting for him to ask something he hadn't thought to ask yet. His eyes drifted to the door, and for the first time in a long time, Walter wondered, not about engines or wiring, but about people, about timing, about what he might have missed. Who was that man? Why here? Why now? And how long had he been remembering something Walter had already forgotten? The morning sky was gray again, same as it had been that week, but there was no rain, just that kind of quiet before something shifts. Walter was restocking oil cans on the shelf when he heard the low rumble outside. Not a regular car, not even a delivery van. It was heavier, deeper. He stepped out and saw it, an 18-wheeler, clean and new, pulling into the curb with slow purpose. It stopped directly in front of his shop. The logo on the side matched the one on the business card he'd tucked away in his drawer, Apex Freight Solutions. The door of the truck opened and the young man stepped down. He wasn't dressed in a suit this time, still neat, but more relaxed, as if the visit wasn't for business, as if it meant something else. Walter stood in the doorway, hands resting at his sides, waiting. The young man walked up slowly. "I didn't want to call first," he said. "I just wanted to come back in person." Walter gave a small nod. Not cold, just listening. The man glanced at the garage, then at the windows above, then back at Walter. His voice softened. "I stood next to my mother that day, the day you helped her. I was 15. We were on our way to my scholarship interview in the next town. She kept saying we were going to be late. I was ready to give up, but you just lifted the hood and got to work like it was nothing." Walter blinked. "She was panicking," the man continued. "We'd already missed one bus. The car breaking down was the last straw. I thought we'd have to walk. But then you fixed it. You didn't ask questions. You didn't even ask her name." Walter looked at him, eyes steady. "I didn't know your name either," the man said, "until I saw the shop again last week." He reached into his bag and pulled out a thin folder. Nothing dramatic. Just paper. A contract. "We've got a fleet now. 42 trucks. I want them all serviced here," he said, quieter this time. "I've already let the team know. No need for contracts and calls." Walter took the folder but didn't open it. He held it in both hands. His fingers curled around the edges like it might float away. "You don't remember me," the young man said, quieter now. "But I've never forgotten." There was nothing loud in the way he said it, just truth, laid down like a coin on the table. Walter looked down at his hands, calloused, smudged, cracked at the knuckles. Hands that had lifted engines, pulled tires from the ditch, rewired turn signals in the dark. For decades, with no fanfare. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. His throat moved once, then again. He just nodded. The young man didn't wait for thanks. He looked around the shop once more. "You never knew what that moment meant," he said, almost to himself. "But I did, every day since." Then he smiled, small, honest. Walter turned slightly, like he needed to move or sit or just breathe. He stepped back into the shop and set the folder gently on the counter, not like a deal, like something fragile. Behind him, the fan still made its usual clacking sound. Outside, the truck's engine ticked in cooling rhythm. The young man didn't leave right away. He stood for another moment, watching. Walter looked up again, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to ask quietly, "What was your mother's name?" The young man smiled wider, but this time it wavered. "Elaine," he said. "She passed 3 years ago." Walter said nothing, but he reached over, opened the top drawer where the candy bar had been, where the business card still rested, and placed the contract inside. Folded, careful. His hands lingered there. Not shaking, just still. The garage still looks the same from the outside. Faded paint, crooked mailbox, the old fan in the window still spinning with that familiar rattle. But if you pass by at night, you'll notice something different now. The lights stay on, not every night, but often, late enough that truck engines hum outside the bay, tires crunch the gravel, and the sound of tools clinking carries out into the quiet street. Walter doesn't rush. He never did. But his hands don't rest as often anymore. He's still the same man, quiet, careful, sleeves always rolled, eyes steady. He doesn't talk about the past, doesn't mention the woman in the rain, or the boy beside her, or the contract now folded neatly in the top drawer. That drawer holds more than paper. It holds the things he doesn't know how to say. He just works. Sometimes the young man visits, never in a suit, just jeans, a sweater. He doesn't say much either. He straightens a crooked chair, replaces a light bulb, wipes the old cash-only sign with a damp cloth like it still means something. Then he sits for a while, drinks coffee from a chipped mug, and leaves. They don't say thank you. They don't need to. Just a nod, a glance. And the work goes on. No one tells the story. No one records it. But something about that garage feels warmer now, like it remembers. Like it carries a little piece of the moment that changed everything without saying a word. And maybe that's enough. There are kind things that don't need anyone to see, but they still touch the hearts of those who need them. Maybe this isn't a big story, but for someone, it might be exactly the reminder they need. If you've ever met someone like this in your life, or you've quietly done something kind yourself, leave a heart below. Who knows, your story might inspire someone who needs to see their faith in kindness again. Or maybe, just send this video to someone you think they deserve more love.